Okay, the recording is on. Thank you very much for joining, Rabbi Chananya Weissman. It's a great delight and pleasure. I really appreciate your coming. I understand that you're going to give us a lecture about family values, and which is very important in today's world, where we are under attack constantly. And you're also going to give us an overview about what happened during the pandemic with the rabbinical, how to say it, like the rabbis who supported the injection, the death poison injection. So the floor is yours. Please lecture us.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I'm sorry if the sound quality or the video quality is not great, but we'll make the best of it. And I also understand that most or all of the people joining us tonight are not native English speakers, so I'll try to speak slowly. I generally speak very, very quickly. I'm from New York originally, and that's the law that you have to speak fast, but I will try to moderate and speak a little slowly. Also, is there a chat box where people can ask questions? Because I can keep my eye on that while we're doing this.
In the main channel, but when you're done, we will just open the floor for questions, and they will ask you questions directly.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm going to start. Fine. So I'm going to just give an overview of a bunch of different issues because these topics are so broad. I tried to narrow it down to just some very main points, and then we can just kind of expand on there in the question session. Okay, so we're starting off with the family values, and it's very important that we start with the premise that God exists. If people don't believe that God exists, then there's really nothing I can say to them because they have no objective basis for what's true and what's false, what's good and what's bad, because anything is logical. If you don't believe in God, then you can say, for example, there are too many people in the world, right? There isn't enough food for everybody. Resources are limited. And once you reach a certain number of people, it's a danger to the planet and it's a danger to everybody. And therefore, we have to eliminate some people. They call it depopulation, but that's really a code word for genocide, for mass murder. If you don't believe in God, it's perfectly logical. If you don't believe in God, then you can say, why should marriage be a union between davka, one man and one woman? Why not a man and a man, a woman and a woman, a whole group of people together raising children? You know, it's perfectly logical. If two people love each other, if one father and one mother is good, maybe two fathers and two mothers are even better, or maybe one of them isn't necessary. A person can make that argument as well. There's no way to prove it or disprove it because there's no objective basis for what's good or bad. So it's very important that we start with the premise of God exists and working from there. I hope that everybody listening tonight does believe that God exists. To me, it's the most self-evident truth in the world. The reason why people tend to struggle with the existence of God, I think, is usually two reasons. One is because there's a lot of evil in the world. And again, if you don't believe in God, what's even evil? You can't define good and evil if there's no such thing as God, because anybody can make up what they think is right. Every evil person in the world will advertise themselves as a good person doing good things. And even though it's harmful to some people, it's for the greater good. But generally speaking, people who don't believe in God have good hearts. They're sensitive people. They see there's a lot of evil and suffering in the world. It doesn't seem fair. And they say, if there's really a God who knows everything and can do everything, he could not possibly allow this evil to go on and not to intervene. The Torah has a lot to say about that. Tzaddik viralo, and Russia vitovlo, but that's one of the main impediments that people have to believing in the existence of God. The other impediment is that science cannot prove that God exists. Now, this is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what science is and what God is. We've already seen in the last couple of years that not everything that comes advertised as science, and especially the science, if there's such a thing, is necessarily trustworthy. However, they say, well, you can't see God, right? We can't see him with our eyes. So how do you know God exists any more than Santa Claus exists? That's the typical line that people say. The problem is that God, by definition, is not a physical being because everything that's physical has boundaries and limits. God, being infinite, by definition, is not physical. If God were physical, he couldn't be God because then he would have limits and he would have boundaries. So the fact that we can't see God with our own eyes doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. It means that's not the basis for evidence that God exists. Science can only teach us things about what we can observe and measure with our senses. That's really what science is. We have something in front of us that we can observe and we can measure and we can study and we can learn more about it. But if we can't observe it and we can't measure it, then by definition, science really has nothing to say about it. So it's not that science can't prove that God exists. It's just science is not relevant in terms of God. That doesn't mean there's no evidence of God's existence. It just means science is a different category than God. There's no stira between science and God, because what science really should be is observing everything in God's world, studying it and learning more about what God put into the world. So if we don't understand something, it's because we need to study it more and understand what God made, how it works, why he made it a certain way. That's one of the ways that God speaks to us, is by his nature. God made something a certain way. He could have made it an infinite number of other ways. For example, if God wanted, he could have created one gender. It doesn't have to be male and female. He could have made one gender, and that gender would be able to give birth on its own. God chose on purpose to make men and women to be physically different, emotionally different. Everything about them is different, and they have different roles. God chose that as a system of the world as opposed to something else that is meant to teach us something. The other way that God speaks to us, of course, is through the Torah. If you want to know something about an author, then you can read his book, especially if the author is telling you about himself and telling you about what he wants. That, of course, is the easiest avenue for understanding more about God. So bottom line, those who don't believe in the existence of God are the biggest fools. There's nothing intellectual about them. They will inevitably believe in something that's even more foolish than God. They'll believe that there are spirits and there's energy and there's karma, because they have to make some sense of the world. They have to make some sense of the order of the world and explain things. But any explanation or theory that they come up with is going to make a lot less sense than there is one conscious being that created everything and knows everything and is in charge of everything. Any other theory that they have to replace God is going to make less sense. Okay? Now, science, as I explained, is a study of God's world. It's not a substitute. Those who don't accept God have no concept of truth, which is a convenient excuse to then do evil. Because if no such thing as true and false or good and bad, I can do whatever I want. I can rationalize it. I can justify it. And it's not evil because I have an excuse. I have a reason to do it. So the only way a person can be a good person, really good, is if he believes in God. Because otherwise he's making it up as he goes along. And even if he has the best of intentions, even if he wants to help people, what does it mean to help somebody? That's up to anybody to decide. Maybe it means that we have to kill the old people because they're not paying taxes anymore. They're not working anymore. The money that we save on their health care can be spent on other people who have longer to live. They've already lived their lives. Maybe they're suffering. It's very logical. We can rationalize it. The only reason why we know it's evil is because God said it's murder. To end a person's life one moment before it should naturally end is an act of murder. It's not for us to calculate the value of any human life and place a price tag on it. God says every human life has infinite value, and every moment of that life has infinite value. That's only good because God said so. So the definition of good really is whatever God says is the right thing to do. That's the only definition of good that makes sense, because anything else is people making it up as they go along. And I can decide that something is a good thing, but who am I to decide what's good? Who are you to decide what's good? Who is Bill Gates to decide what's good for the world? Anybody can come up with anything. So the definition of good and evil hinge on the existence of God. There's no such thing as an atheist who is a righteous person, let alone a holy person. It is impossible. If you don't believe in God, you cannot be a good person. Why? Because again, an atheist is going to make it up as he goes along, whatever feels good to him in the moment, but he can't define what good is. Just like in the Western world, they can't define what a woman is anymore, and they change the definition of things all the time. An atheist cannot define what good is. And even if he manages to come up with some complicated definition of the world, again, why should anybody else care what he says? I have a different definition of good. Everybody can come up with good on their own. Not surprisingly, history is full of God-fearing heroes who are good people that we can truly learn from. But the heroes in history, the role models that we have in history, do not include atheists. All the heroes, all the good people that we learn from throughout history were God-fearing people, because they were the only people who could truly be good. An atheist can guess, and he'll guess it right some of the time, maybe, but he can never be a truly good person. Now, being that that's the case, it logically follows from there that God, being that God is the creator of everything, and he knows everything, and he did everything for a purpose, and everything is done perfectly, he wants us to know right from wrong. He wants us to know his will. Because how can we do God's will if we don't know what it is? How can we do the right thing if we don't know what the right thing is? God has to inform us of what is good. In this week's Parsha, it says, Moshe, in his last speech to the Jews, is telling them, I've given before you today the path of life and the path of death, the path of blessing and the path of curses, the path of good and the path of evil. And then he advises you, choose the path of life. We would think it's the most obvious choice in the world, but it's not so obvious because, again, we are tempted to do the wrong thing. We're frail. We have human frailties and faults. And sometimes evil comes packaged as good. Like the evil people today wrap all of their evil in very nice wrapping paper and a very fancy package so it looks good. And they advertise it to us. But Moshe is telling us we all have the ability to tell right from wrong. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a fair game. God has to inform us and make it possible for even the simplest person to know right from wrong. Okay. Now, again, nature is a sign of God's will. Just like the Torah expresses God's will, nature itself, being God's handiwork, is an expression of God's will. So look at nature. What is man best suited to be? The hunter, the warrior, the gatherer, the provider. He's the physically stronger of the two sexes. So that indicates to you that, again, he's supposed to go out there and handle the greater physical tasks. Men cannot bear children. Women can carry children. Now imagine, during the youngest, strongest years of an adult woman's life, let's say roughly from 18 to 40, when she's most fertile and able to have children, okay, that's when she would be advancing in her career, traveling the world, advancing in her education, becoming a high-powered lawyer. Davka, during those years, if she has her values right, she will be getting pregnant and bearing children, which will physically incapacitate her for months at a time. For 9 months, she'll be carrying a child. For some period of time after that, she will be weak. She'll be nursing. She'll be caring for the child. So immediately, while she is advancing in her career and advancing in her other life goals, suddenly, boom, she's physically handicapped for an extended period of time. So clearly, God is sending us a message over here that woman's primary role in life is not to be the hunter, gatherer, warrior, even if she's very capable, even if she's very talented, and even if she can do those things on the side, that is not her primary purpose. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to Davka during her strongest youthful years to incapacitate her for an extended period of time, multiple times. So the woman's job, nature is telling us, is to carry children, to run the home. Women are more empathetic than men. They're more emotional than men. They're more in touch with their feelings. So clearly, nature is sending us a message that the woman's role is to offer emotional support to the children, to the husband, to set the emotional tone in the home, to nurture. That's just something that we see from nature. Now, the Torah, of course, is also an expression of God's will. What is the very first comment that God makes about the human race? Be fruitful and multiply. This is both a blessing and it's a mitzvah to have children. And this is not just a mitzvah for the Jews. This is a commandment for all people. God wants even the Goyim, even the nations of the world, to be fruitful and multiply and fill up the earth. That's the very first statement that God makes to the human race. Just taking a drink, because I'm getting over a bout of laryngitis. It's not COVID, don't worry. Just a little bit hoarse. So that's his first comment about the human race. Now, the Torah doesn't place any limits on this. God doesn't say, have 500,000 children, populate the earth up to 500,000, and then stop because there's not enough food for everybody, and there isn't enough energy and oil and resources. Stop after 500,000, or stop after 1 million, or stop after 1 billion, or stop after 10 billion. God could express himself very clearly. No limit. The more children you have, the more blessing there is. So then the atheist, the non-believer, will say, well, there's only a finite amount of space in the world. There's only a finite amount of resources. At some point, there's going to be a conflict between the number of people and the available resources. That's not our business. God runs the world. God is infinite. God can solve the problem, right? The same thing with the land of Israel. Chazal tell us Israel is called Eretz HaTzvi, the land of the deer, a tzvi. Why is it called Eretz HaTzvi? Because just as the skin of a deer can expand, so the land of Israel expands to accommodate the Jewish people. The more Jews there are who come on Aliyah, and the more children they have, the land will expand. How does it happen? I don't know. It isn't scientific. But God doesn't have to be scientific. God is beyond science. God created science. God is not limited by the physical boundaries that science is limited by. So there will always be enough resources. God will make it happen. The same God who took care of millions of people in a desert for 40 years, and there was no food shortage, and there was no water shortage, and there was no clothing shortage. There was no shortage of anything. They lived just fine for 40 years in the desert, millions of people, he can take care of a few more million people in the land of Israel or on planet Earth. Again, we don't need a scientific explanation, because if you believe in God, you understand that's his job. We have a job, God has a job. I don't do God's job, he doesn't do my job. If I do my job and he does his job, everything works out perfectly fine. If I try to be God and take over his job, everything goes to hell. The Torah also teaches us that the more children you have, the greater a blessing it is. Our forefathers and foremothers, right, the founders of the Jewish people, they were not naturally able to have children. It was a miracle for them, especially for the mothers, to be able to have children, and they wanted it more than anything in life. They said, if we don't have children, we're as good as dead. Now, what modern woman would say that? Obviously, we're not saying that people who don't have children, their lives are worthless. Unfortunately, I don't have children, and I believe that my life is very worthwhile. However, we have to be honest and recognize that Torah is telling us a very important message, that children are fundamental to a human being's existence. Procreation, filling up the world, creating a legacy is the most important thing a person can do. Now, again, if a person is physically unable to have children, God forbid, so he has to deal with that, just like people are born with handicaps or problems in life, and they can't do everything that other people are able to do. So nebuch, they make the best that they have, and they understand that this is God's will, and that's it. They just move on. But from an idealistic standpoint, everybody should want to have as many children as possible and see that having children is a blessing. The more children you have, the greater the blessing it is. When the Jews went down to Egypt, Chazal tell us that they were fruitful and multiplied. They came down as a nation of 70 people. And within a short time, the land was swarming with them. And this was seen as a blessing. Chazal said the women were having children 6 at a time. What modern woman today would want to have 6 children at a time? Or even 6 children total in the course of her entire life? Very, very few. But that is Western thinking infiltrating the Jewish mind. The Jewish mind says, just as I wouldn't put a limit on how much money I can earn. If you ask a person, how much money would you like to have? You'd say the more the better. There's no limit, right? A popular question when you're being interviewed for a job is how much money would you like to earn? What would you like your salary to be? I never understood that question. If I was applying for a job and they asked me how much money would you like to earn, I'd say, how much money do you have? As much as possible. There's no limit. That's probably not the answer they're looking for, but why sell yourself short, right? The more the better. So children are a blessing. Just as you want as much money as you can have as much. You should want as much children as you have. Now, again, children require time and responsibility and money, but that's God's job. We do our job by having the children, doing the best we can to take care of them, and then count on God. God is an equal partner in our children. There are 3 partners in a child: the father, the mother, and Hashem. And Hashem's job, if we're doing our job, is to, if he puts people in the world, it's his job to then give them the resources that they need in order to thrive. The Western world in particular hates children. We see this today. They always kind of hated children, but now it's really coming out to the surface. They hate children. They love murdering children before they're born, and they have all kinds of reasons to do it. There's too many people in the world, and the women don't want the child, and it's interfering with the woman's rights and the woman's ability to achieve in life, and children are a burden, and children are expensive, and there's baby food shortages. Why do you want to bring children into the world when you're going to have a hard time feeding them? Every excuse under the sun. Why bring children into a world with evil? They sell us every excuse under the sun because they hate children. And when children are born, what does the Western world want? They want to indoctrinate them, that they themselves shouldn't procreate. Bad enough that the child was born, but we don't want that child to have more children. Let's sterilize the children. Let's indoctrinate them to be confused about their gender. Let's indoctrinate them to never want to get married because marriage is tying you down, that you should sleep around with lots of people, or even just sleep with one person, but don't marry the person because that's making a commitment and it's tying you down. Why would you ever want to do such a thing? The Western world hates children, hates the family, and hates life. Now, compared to Judaism, we have in the 10 Commandments, the Aseres HaDibros. One of them is Kibud Ava'im. Now, I heard the following from my Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Tendler, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. He passed away a few months ago. If you look at the luchos, like every shul has like a luchos where they have the Aseres HaDibros, there's 5 and 5, right? 5 on one side, 5 on the other side. The first 5 are mitzvahs between man and Hashem. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? Don't swear don't swear falsely. You shouldn't have other gods. Keep Shabbos, right? Those are all God's side. Then you have the other side. The last 5 are all between man and his fellow man. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery, right? All the other don't covet other people's possessions, don't testify falsely, right? That's between man and man. Now, where does kibbud av v'em appear? I would think that's interpersonal, but that's number 5. That appears on God's side. Kibbud av v'em, I would think, is a mitzvah between me and my parents. Why? My parents brought me into the world. They raised me. They spent a lot of money on me. I was a perfect child. I didn't give my parents any trouble, but most children, I imagine, give their parents some trouble along the way, right? And we have to be grateful because your parents tolerate you and they put up with you and they clean up with you. They clean up after you. So I would think it's gratitude to your parents, but it's not so. That's certainly an element of that. But think about this. Let's say you have a child born into the world and the parents can't take care of the child. So immediately they abandon the child. They put him up for adoption. The child grows up. He never knows his real parents. He never knows. And then at the age of 30 or 40, he finds out that the people who raised him are not his biological parents. Now, of course, he has to be very grateful to those people, but he's curious. He wants to find out who his real parents are. And he goes and he investigates. He finds his real mother and his real father. The Torah says he has an obligation of kibbud av v'em, no different than anybody else. He has to honor his parents, and this is one of the hardest mitzvahs in the Torah to do. Chazal say that most people are better off, in a certain sense, if they never know their parents, because the mitzvah is so hard to fulfill. We have to show so much honor for our parents that almost nobody can do this mitzvah properly to the fullest extent. Almost nobody. It's such a serious mitzvah. Now here you have this person. His parents literally did nothing for him. They threw him away the moment he was born. All of his gratitude should go to his step-parents, and he does owe them a great debt of gratitude. And yet, for some reason, he has to show his biological parents, who did nothing for him, who threw him away, he has to show them full honor. The full mitzvah applies. The reason is because it's a mitzvah not strictly between you and your parents. You have to have gratitude for anybody who does something good for you. But that's not the ikar. That's not the basis of kibbud av v'em. The basis of kibbud av v'em is because you are recognizing your origins. You're recognizing those who came before you. You're respecting the people and Hashem who brought you into the world. The 3 equal partners, your father, your mother, and God, all brought you into the world. And if your parents do nothing more than that, you have to recognize them, because by recognizing your parents and honoring them, you are honoring God. And that's why this mitzvah is on God's side of the world. Now, not coincidentally, the Western world hates parents as well. They teach children to not have respect for their parents. The more progressive, the more progress they make, the less respect young people have for their predecessors. Children are taught to rebel against their parents. The schools and the governments are constantly trying to drive a wedge between children and parents. They don't want the parents to know what their children are being taught. They want the government to have the opportunity to take custody of the children away from the parents for any little infraction. We're not talking about cases of child abuse, but now we're talking about if the schools indoctrinate the children to change their gender and the parents object, that would be grounds for the government to step in and confiscate the children. The Western world hates parents. And think about this. Think about this. Children today, even young children, even teenagers and adolescents, they think they're more moral than their parents. They automatically think their parents are more primitive. Their parents grew up with less liberalism and leftism and equality and rights and tolerance. They grew up in a dark age. Maybe the parents learned a little along the way, but the children are going to be more enlightened. So the children automatically have to look down on their parents because their parents are racist and their parents are primitive and their parents are white supremacists and their parents are terrorists and whatever other names that they come up for these people. The children are taught to not have respect for their parents. The punishment is going to be that if the children themselves ever have children, which as we know is increasingly unlikely because of their indoctrination, their children are going to do the same thing to them. Because as time goes on, according to the leftist Western ideology, the more time goes on, the more enlightened people become. With Judaism, it's the exact opposite. We believe as time goes on, we become more distant from the source, which is Har Sinai when we got the Torah. We have respect for our parents, for our elders, for our rabbis, for those who came before us. We believe that the rabbis of former times knew more than the rabbis of today because they were closer to the source. So we automatically respect our parents, we respect our elders, we respect our rabbis. We don't say old people have lived their lives and they have no use anymore. We cherish old people because they are not only the people who brought us into the world and built the world for us, gave us a world that we can live in, but they also are harboring the wisdom of older times, and we need them. We need them to teach us this wisdom, to transfer it to us. So we depend on the old people. Again, it's the exact opposite of the Western world. They want to erase father and mother. They want to have parent 1, parent 2, parent 3, parent 4, no parents. We dafka have a mother and a father. We recognize that because kibbud av v'em is really respecting Hashem. And that's why it's on God's side of the ledger. Okay. Parents are also responsible to raise their own children, obviously, according to the Torah. Not outsource it to the government or to a school system. Now, there is room, obviously, for schools, but ideally, parents should be directly responsible for the education of their children. If they're not capable of educating their own children, they can hire somebody to do it. In the olden days, they would hire private instructors and maybe make small classes. But even if you're going to be part of an educational system, parents need to be very actively involved in the education of their children. They need to monitor it. They need to know who their children's teachers are and what's going on in the classroom and what their children are being taught. They need to be actively involved because it is the parent's responsibility to raise the children. It is the parent's responsibility. That's why they're there. Now, discipline is part of this process. Discipline, not surprisingly, is very out of favor in the Western world. It used to be normal for a parent to even strike a child. Now, we're not talking about beating the hell out of a child and child abuse and hurting the child, but a gentle touch. A gentle touch should show that you are unhappy with the child. Okay? It could be just an angry look. A parent should never be actually angry at a child, but sometimes you have to show that you are upset with the child. Inside, you should not be emotionally changed at all. You should be filled with love for the child, but sometimes you have to show that you are angry. You have to show that you are upset. And that should be the greatest punishment in the world to a child, to know that he upset his parents. He shouldn't need to get grounded or lose his allowance or any sort of punishment. Just knowing that his parents, who love him so much and only want the best for him and just do everything for him, they are upset with him. He did something that upset his parents. That should make a child cry. And similarly, since God is our ultimate parent, if we know we did something that upsets Hashem, that is outside of bounds, he shouldn't need to punish us. Just knowing that Hashem, our Father in heaven, who is infinite love and infinite goodness, and created us with love and wants only the best for us, and we did something that is displeasing to him, that knowledge alone should be the greatest punishment. Now, unfortunately, that's a very sophisticated idea, and most people are primitive. They understand discipline. They understand the patch. So discipline, real punishment, is the most primitive incentive for people to do the right thing, but it's also the most effective way for people to get to do the right thing. So children need to be disciplined, right? It says in Mishlei, the book of Proverbs by Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of men, spare the rod, spoil the child, right? You have to sometimes hit a child. You have to discipline. Again, we're not talking about beating the hell out of a child, but sometimes you have to be harsh, right? You have to send a message home to a child. The longer you wait to discipline a child, the more difficult it's going to be. We see this going on in the Western world with the breakdown of the family, where we just accept everything and we shower children with love regardless of what they do. We accept what they do. Never say an angry word to a child. Never express you're upset with anything that they do. Just love, 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 love. That's not love. That's hatred for the child. That's the worst thing that you could. If you hated the child and wanted the worst possible outcome, that's what you would do. Never to discipline, never to set boundaries, never to punish. Again, you have to know the right way, the time and the place. But to never lay down the law with the child is the worst thing that you could possibly do for a child, which, again, since the Western world hates children, that's what they are advocating. To just always give a prize and an award to a child. Everybody gets a prize. Everybody gets an award. Everybody gets accepted regardless of what they do. That is because they hate children. Judaism says you love them and you show that you love them by sometimes you have to discipline them because that's what sets them straight. Now, the Torah values life for its spiritual value. The Western world, as we said before, hates life. They say living beings are using up resources. People have nothing more than utilitarian value. How much are they producing? How much are they paying taxes? Are they useful for slave labor? Let's check out the demographics. Maybe they're useful for voting purposes. We need certain types of people living in certain places to influence the vote. People are only valuable in the Western world for what the government or the people in power can take out of the people. It's not what they're giving the people, but what the people can give them in terms of money, in terms of resources, in terms of servitude. Okay? There's no spiritual value to human life, which is why you have a concept of useless eaters, jobs being essential or not being essential, like we had during COVID, right? Some people were essential, some people were not. Who the hell is a government to say that one person is more essential than the next person, or one person's job is more essential than the next person? That's not the job of the government. The government's job is to keep the streets clean and to keep the streets safe and then get out of my life, not to tell me how valuable I am to them. I don't work for them, but that's the Western value. And they've infiltrated people's consciousness through very dedicated propaganda to start thinking along those terms, right? How much is a person's quality of life? If an old person is sick and suffering, then it's merciful to kill the old person. If the old person is having difficulty paying their bills, knock them off. If a child is born with a handicap, then the child would want you to kill the child. They're doing that even in Europe, right? They're doing it in Canada now. If a child is born with a handicap, let's kill the child. If the scientists say, if the doctors say that a pregnant woman is holding a child that is likely to be born with a handicap, let's not even give that child the chance to live. Do we assume the doctor might be wrong? If doctor's ever been wrong about anything, doesn't matter. Don't take the risk. As a mercy, as an act of mercy, kill the child. They've turned murder into an act of mercy. Why? Because they put a value on your life. You didn't put a value on your life. They stamped you with a value, like a farmer branding a horse. How much is this animal worth? That's all you are to them, is a piece of meat and a piece of value. And if your value isn't high enough, then knock you off for your own good and for the greater good. People are like tissues. The government uses them for a degrading purpose, to blow their nose or to wipe themselves and then to throw them away. That's what human beings are in the Western world and in this new world order government that they're trying to institute. Torah, on the flip side, values human life almost entirely for its spiritual value. Right? We only value people for their spiritual, a common figure of speech in English. You say, how much is a person worth? How much are you worth? So what they mean by that is, how much money do you have? That's how much you're worth. The Torah doesn't decide how much you're worth by how much money you happen to have at any given time. It's, who are you as a person? What's your spiritual value? Are you a tzaddik or a rasha? Are you serving Hashem or are you serving idolatry? If you end a person's life 1 minute sooner than he should die, you are a murderer and you get executed for that. We don't have economists or actuaries or anyone else decide how much a life is worth or whose life shall be sacrificed for the greater good, because every life is infinite value and cannot be replaced. That concept of, calculating lives and whose life is worth more is evil. That's an excuse for many of the most evil governments in history, especially in modern times when evil comes dressed up as good. Let's move on now to feminism. The Western world believes that the job of feminists is to make women happy. But what do feminists do in real life? They make women unhappy. They take a woman who's perfectly happy and they say, you should be miserable. You're getting cheated out of a good life. You don't even realize it. Your husband is taking advantage of you. Your children is taking advantage of you. Your boss is taking advantage of you. Everybody's taking advantage of you just because you're a woman. You should abandon the man. Don't get married because a man is just going to hold you down. A man is going to hold you down in life, and no man is good enough for you. Don't have children because children are a burden. They're going to hold you back. You be your own God. So they take women who can be happy and should be happy and convince them to be miserable. That's what the feminists do. They make women miserable. And in fact, if you look at feminists, they're the most unhappy people on earth. They don't smile. They don't laugh. They have no sense of humor. They're the most miserable, angry people on earth. And they're the most liberated people on earth. You would think that they should be really happy, because at no point in known history have women had more money, education, freedom, opportunity than ever before, as far as I know. And they concurrently happen to be as miserable as they've ever been. So if the job of feminists is to make women more empowered and more happy, they're doing a terrible job, because the more they empower them, the more unhappy they seem to get. Why? The day women are happy is the day feminists are out of business. If women said, you know what, I have enough rights. I'm satisfied with my life. I'm satisfied with what I'm earning at my job, and I'm satisfied with my family life, and I'm just satisfied. I'm happy. The feminists are out of business. They need to be activists. They need to have victims. The whole Western world is infatuated with victims. As long as they could keep people angry and victimized, they have endless money and power. What's the Torah perspective on this? Not so much on feminism, because we already know that women have different roles than men. We talked about that. And of course, there's a lot to say. I wrote a whole sefer about this. But we understand a woman's role is to be an ezer kenegdo. That's the first comment that God makes about women specifically, is to be ezer kenegdo. Now, if you go out on a date with a woman, speaking to the men right now, the women can eavesdrop. If a man goes out with a woman and the woman says, what are you looking for? And he says, I'm looking for an ezer kenegdo. I'm looking for a helpmate. That woman is going to spill water in his face and run off, right? That date's over. And yet that's what the Torah says. A woman should be a helpmate. That's not degrading to a woman. That's in her DNA. That's what God made a woman to be. Now, that's not making a woman a slave. If you look at Jewish women throughout history, the frum Orthodox Jewish women, They have very strong personalities. They're not slaves to anybody. They're princesses and they're queens, and they deserve to be treated like that. They're very, very active in the home, outside the home. They have minds of their own. They're very educated. They're very talented. Of course, it varies in different social systems, exactly how much a woman works, how much she's educated. That's for every woman to figure out for herself. But generally speaking, the women in Judaism are very, very empowered. They're not slaves. The feminists come and they convince them that they should believe that they've been enslaved all along. But in Judaism, the women tend to be very happy. The women who have a real family life, I'm talking about, the women who have children, who have a husband, and they're a helpmate, they're very satisfied. And when they grow old, they have a whole legion of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My mother was an only child. She has 7 children. She has, I think, over 30 grandchildren. She has great-grandchildren already. And she's a full-time great-grandmother. I mean, she spends all her time, one phone call after another, email, phone call, all day long, going from one to the next, one to the next. She somehow manages to be close to all of them. She has time for all of them. Now, a woman like that, who has time to raise all of these people and be actively involved in their lives, could run a company, could be a CEO of a company, could be a lawyer. My mother almost went to law school. Instead, she had 7 children. She doesn't regret it to this day. She wishes she had more children because now that she's older in life, she just turned 80, thank God, and she's spry and young. I hope she's listening. Mom, I love you. Okay? She has a very, very full life. She is surrounded with children and grandchildren who care about her and love her. If she had gone to law school, she probably would have been a very good lawyer. She would have earned a lot of money. She'd have a piece of paper on the wall. She might have won an award. She might have had some newspaper clippings about her. She might have won a big case that made her famous. But where would she be now? What would her life look like right now? It would be very lonely. It would be a very lonely, empty, purposeless life. And she would say, I've lived my life. Maybe it's time for a mercy killing. I have nothing left to live for. My mother wants to live forever because she has a real legacy. She has children and grandchildren. She's involved in their lives. She's really working. She really produced something with her life. The Western world doesn't recognize that. They don't want people to recognize that. Okay. Another thing about victimization is the Jewish people never played the victim card. We could play the victim card better than everybody. The blacks in America have gotten propaganda against them. A lot of brave blacks are speaking out about this and have spoken out about this. But the government, the Democrats, have always encouraged the blacks to consider themselves as victims, to consider themselves as if everybody's a racist and the whole system is stacked against them. Now, there's probably some truth in that. There is racism. They have faced racism over the years, but they're mired in this victim mentality, and that means that they're always going to be angry at the world, and they're always going to be stuck fighting for something and always feeling like a victim and living like a victim. If you believe that you're a victim, you're going to live like one. You're never really going to be able to rise to the top because you're always going to have a victim mentality. It keeps the people down. The blacks today are kept in slavery by the rich elites in the U.S. They're not physically slaves. They don't have somebody whipping them and forcing them to work, but their mentality, they're forced in a mentality to be slaves, to be dependent on the government for everything, to be angry at society, to view everybody as a threat. That's how the leftists want them to think of themselves. A liberated person says, you know what? There have been some injustices. It hasn't been fair. I've gotten the short end of the stick. The rules have been stacked against me, but you know what? I'm going to win anyway. I'm going to work hard and I'm going to show them. And in fact, many blacks have done that in America. I'm not just picking on them. This is sort of a mentality all over the world. You can look at the Arabs in Israel, the so-called Palestinians. It's exactly the same game with them. They're taking handouts from the UN and other countries and living in terrible camps, right? They're not allowed to grow out of the victim mentality, because if they did, the people sponsoring them and getting power through them would be put out of business. So the UN and all the countries that are supporting the Gazans and the Arabs and the so-called Palestinians want them to be victims. They want them to be on the bottom rung of the ladder, because then they can use them to push an agenda. The Jews have been abused throughout history as much as any other people, and we haven't played the victim card. Wherever we've been exiled, wherever we've gone, whatever laws they've passed against us, however they've rigged the game against us, we just work really hard and we find a way to succeed anyway. You don't let us be doctors, we'll be bankers. You don't let us be bankers, we'll be farmers. We'll figure out a way to get it done, and we will thrive, and we'll continue to learn Torah in the worst of times. That's really a lesson for all the other victims, both real and perceived in the world, the feminists, the blacks, the Arabs, whoever else in the world is being persecuted, to look to the Jews and say, even if the deck is stacked against you, not saying that you shouldn't try to make it fair. Of course it should be fair. But in the meantime, don't be a perpetual, endless victim. You don't need to see yourself as a victim. The Western world wants everybody to see themselves as victims. It's like a race. Who can be the biggest victims? It used to be the women. Now the women aren't valued so much in the victim scale. Now it's the transgenders, right? It was the gays. Now even the gays, they don't even care about them so much. Now it's the transgenders. And beyond that, it's the children transgender, the child transgenders. That's the top level of the victim class, right? So it's sort of this game of who can be the biggest victim. They get the most freebies, they get the deck stacked in their favor, the most things given to them without them having to work, and it makes them perpetual victims. Jews don't play the victim card, and we have to get out of that cycle. Okay, the proof is in the pudding about the Western world, and with this we will conclude.
I say something, I'm sorry, Chananya.
Yes.
I strongly disagree with you because I think Jews are the biggest victims in the world, and they play the victim card every single day of their being. That's what I think, and I think.
Well, I agree with you that Jews are victims, and I did the greatest victims, and I said that maybe there are some Jews who play the victim card, but the ones who understand.
Sorry, go ahead.
The ones who understand Torah and Judaism do not play the victim card. We don't say, "Give me free stuff because I'm a Jew and because I've been persecuted." Now, again, if we have rights, if people owe us something, then we should fight to get it. Of course, I'm not saying that you should abandon what's coming to you, but don't let it hold you back in life.
So Israelite, in your eyes, is only someone who believes in the Torah word for word?
No, a Jew is a Jew. A person can be born a Jew.
I personally don't believe in a Jewish people because it doesn't exist in the Bible.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about. The Torah says that God created a nation of Jewish people. From Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, he made a Jewish people. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Can you refer me where it says Jewish people in the Torah?
Well, it doesn't use the word Jewish because it's written in Hebrew. But
because it doesn't exist. We are Israelites, don't you think?
The children of Israel. It's the same thing. So the Jew is
Am Israel. We are Am Israel. We are not Am Yehudi. There's no reference to Am Yehudi in the Torah.
La Yehudim ha'isa ora v'simcha v'sasam v'kar in Esther.
Torah?
Yes, that's Torah. Yes,
Where?
Torah and Nevi'im. Okay, if you're a Karaite, if you don't believe,
Karaite, why you make an assumption about me?
Well, because if you're asking me if Esther is part of the Torah, if you can ask me if the Mishnah and the Talmud is part of the Torah, well, that's a definition of Karaite.
It's Mishnah and Talmud.
Well, that's Talmud part of the Torah. We were given. We were not just given the Bible at Har Sinai. We were given the oral law and the written law. That's part of the Torah.
That's what you are telling us, but not everyone must agree with it. What do you mean oral
People
Torah?
can agree. Well, that is.
Just a second. Do you expect me to? Yes.
I don't expect you to do anything. You can do whatever you want.
One second. If I may, I would just like him to continue with the lecture about the family and then about the corona, and then we will open it up for questions, and you're welcome to continue this conversation, which is very interesting for this group.
Yes.
Because Rabbi Weissman, you obviously know that part of the awakening is that there are many questions, and some of the questions is also about the validity of Judaism, the rabbinical system. So people have a lot of concerns about it.
So I'm actually getting to that in the second part. I'm going to be talking a lot about the rabbis in the second part, which I'm almost up to.
Okay, so I just wanted to, just please, if you can say a few words about the welfare in regards, for example, to what's happening with the blacks that you gave as an example, and how do you perpetuate their misery and their poverty, and also please speak about abortion and this LGBT nonsense. All this.
I spoke about that earlier.
Yeah, but yes, you did. But abortion, you didn't. So it's very important for me.
I certainly did. I spoke about abortion. I said that's part of how they hate children, is that they don't even want children to be born. And it's part of the feminist movement where they indoctrinate women to believe that having a child is a burden.
I apologize.
So either they shouldn't.
Yeah. Forgive me, I didn't hear that. Yeah,
no problem.
Go ahead.
I was just saying that the proof is in the pudding. The Western world is always promising a utopian future. If you just do this, then we'll have a perfect world and a perfect balance and everything will be wonderful. Whereas the more progress they make is only making things progressively worse. People are less happy. They need more drugs to get through the day. Children are taking more drugs than ever before. Adults are taking mind-altering drugs and mood-altering drugs. People are stressed out. They can't get through it. We're living in supposedly a very prosperous time. The average standard of living is very good today in most of the world, at least in the Western world, and yet people are miserable. Their suicides are up. They feel empty inside. The Western world is promising a utopia to them, and yet all it does is makes things worse. And at the same time, you have Jews who live a life of Torah. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have a life of problems. Every life has problems, because if your life was perfect and didn't have any problems, there'd be no purpose to the life itself. Life is meant to be challenges. We grow through being challenged in life. So we have to have challenges in life. But a happy life, a happy world means that you are spiritually connected, that your life has a real purpose. The Western world is no spiritual purpose. The Western world is all about advancing in your career, getting honor, getting money. The people who make it to the top of the ladder realize there's nothing more to do. So just make more money and more money and more money, even though they're never going to spend it. It's like getting points in a video game. But it doesn't make them happy. It's not fulfilling anything. They still have an emptiness inside. There's a void inside. The wealthiest people tend to be miserable. Their family lives are miserable. Everything in their life is miserable. Maybe they're smiling for the cameras, but everybody idealizes them and wishes that they had their life, but you don't really want their life because everybody wants to have a happy life. The Western world promises, if you just do this, you just do that, we'll make you happy, but they don't deliver. It's a scam. It's all fake. Okay, I want to get now to the question about rabbis, Erev Rav, and how it ties into the whole COVID thing. This is, of course, a very big topic, and again, I'll try to narrow it down to some of the main points, and then we can sort of branch off from there if people have questions or comments about that. So first of all, what are the Erev Rav? So the Erev Rav actually does appear in what somebody called the Bible. It does appear in the Torah. The Erev Rav is the mixed multitude of nations that latched onto the Jewish people when they left Egypt. And Chazal tell us that the Erev Rav were responsible for dragging the Jews to sin, dragging the Jews down. They converted to Judaism. It seems it's unclear how sincere they were. Maybe they were sincere. Maybe some of them were. But the Erev Rav as a group were by and large very bad people who sort of latched onto the Jewish people because we were riding high at the time and everybody wants to join the front runners. But they were very bad and they caused us a lot of problems. So Chazal tell us that they instigated the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, that they were behind that. And of course they dragged some Jews into it. But the greatest sin of the Jewish people that we're still getting punished for today was started by the Erev Rav. Chazal tells us that the Erev Rav are always like moles. They dress like Jews, they act like Jews, they talk like Jews, but either they're not really Jewish, or even if technically they're Jewish, they're working against us. They're like enemies of the Jewish people. Our main enemy outside the Jewish people, of course, is Amalek. What Amalek does, and this is a separate class, is essentially they try to convince the other goyim to be bad. The average guy is a guy, right? There's different nations, different attitudes, different beliefs. They're not necessarily bad people. Amalek comes along and tricks them and convinces them to become evil, like Haman did with Achashverosh. Haman comes from Amalek, and the whole Purim story happened because of Haman. Achashverosh wasn't really a great guy, but he wasn't a horrible guy either. Haman came along and convinced him to do genocide. Haman came along and convinced him to murder his wife. So he talked him into it. It all sounded logical at the time. It was all for his good and for the benefit of the kingdom. That's how Amalek operates. They get the goyim of the world. Instead of teaching them to be good, they teach them to do evil. The Erev Rav does essentially the same job to the Jewish people. They take a Jew who doesn't know any better, and they talk him into being a bad person, talking into going against the Torah. They're enemies from inside the Jewish people. Now, you can't look at somebody and know that he's an Erev Rav. They don't look a certain way. And not every person who does a bad thing, and not even every rabbi who does a bad thing or says the wrong thing, should be called an Erev Rav. People say the wrong thing. People do the wrong thing. We're all human. So I would categorize an Erev Rav, generally speaking, as somebody who clearly is working to undermine the Jewish people, to weaken the Jewish people, to twist the Torah around, to make it seem like it's saying the exact opposite of what it really means. To undermine and weaken and wage war on the Jewish people, that would be an Erev Rav, as opposed to somebody who has good intentions and he makes a mistake sometimes, which is just about everybody. Now, talking about the role of a rabbi and how psak works. This is a big misunderstanding, and it leads to very big problems. The goyim, for example, they don't understand how kashrus works, right? They have a factory, they're making food. Every once in a while, a rabbi comes in, maybe he's got a long beard and a black hat. He looks around, he blesses the food, they think, and he walks away, right? So the guy thinks, what makes food kosher? A rabbi comes in and blesses the food, and that makes it kosher. Many goyim actually think this. They think the rabbi blesses the food, and that makes it kosher. We know better. We understand that's nonsense, right? What makes food kosher? well, there's certain animals that we can eat and certain animals that we can't eat, and you can't have meat and milk mixed together. That's essentially what kashrus is all about. And the rabbi or whoever it is has to come in and make sure that nothing that comes from a non-kosher source is mixed in with the food. You have to monitor the situation. It's as simple as that. Okay? But the Goyim think the rabbi is essentially making up what's kosher. Now, Jews, unfortunately, think a rabbi can make up a law. That if a rabbi really, really, really wants to do something, or if he really, really, really wants to change something, he has the power to do it. And he can justify it. He can find the pasuk in the Torah and interpret it a certain way, right? And then, presto, that's the job of a rabbi, to just make up the law. And if there's a problem, then the rabbi can fix the problem by making up a law. And this is very, very damaging because it misleads people about the Torah in many, many ways. You have rabbis today, or people calling themselves rabbi, who are justifying all of the Western nonsense that we were talking about until now, saying the Torah says that abortion's great, and the Torah says that you could be gay and you could be transgender and you can do whatever you want and find the pasuk in the Torah. Why? Because it says that you have to love people, and it says everybody's in the image of God, and you can just find the pasuk and interpret it a certain way to justify anything. So that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem is that it gives bad PR for good rabbis. When people see that rabbis are clearly pushing evil things and justifying it according to the Torah, it leads to anti-Semitism, right? Many of the most prominent, famous rabbis today are people that were pushing the COVID shots, pushing the lockdowns, pushing the masks, pushing all kinds of bad things. So the average person who doesn't know better, and maybe it's not even fair to expect him to know better, looks at that and says, the rabbis are all bad. The Torah is all bad. I don't know any better. If that's what the rabbi says the Torah says, that must be what the Torah says, and therefore Judaism, the Torah is bad. It's very bad PR. And then you have good rabbis who come along and try to explain what the Torah really means, but their voices are drowned out. They're not as prominent. The media is not giving them coverage. And again, the average person who doesn't know so much, it's very hard for them to tell the difference. So when you have Erev Rav like this, it actually brings anti-Semitism. It brings hatred to the Jewish people and the Torah. And even within Judaism, it turns off many Jews. The average Jew, who maybe didn't get much of a Torah education and doesn't know so much, will see that so many rabbis and so many prominent rabbis are saying things and doing things that are clearly evil. They'll say, the Torah must be very bad. It can't be true. I don't want anything to do with it. And again, it's hard to blame them. They don't know any better. And the only exposure that they have to rabbis and Torah is fake Torah and fake rabbis. So these are some of the ways that the Erev Rav cause real damage to the Jewish people, because they undermine the real rabbis, they undermine the Torah, they bring hatred to the Jewish people, and they turn off Jews from even wanting to learn Torah. They say, if a rabbi can act like this, and a rabbi can say things like that, I don't want anything to do with it. Okay? Now, rabbis, generally speaking, should not work for the government. Rabbis ideally shouldn't work for anybody. Moshe Rabbeinu was praised. He praised himself in the story with Korach. He said, "Lo cha mor echad mehem nasasi v'lo hari osi es achad mehem." Even when I needed to travel, I didn't ride on one of their donkeys. Okay, I didn't harm anybody. I didn't take anything from the Jewish people. I worked for free. God paid my salary. God took care of me. I didn't take a salary from anybody. Shmuel Hanavi also said the same thing. When the Jews were coming asking for a king, and Shmuel was very upset with them because it was the wrong way for them to ask. They didn't want a king for the right reasons and in the right manner. So Shmuel got very upset with the Jewish people, and he gave them musar. And one of the things he says was, you should trust me when I'm saying, I've never heard any of you. I've never taken anything from you. If anybody has any claims against me, say them now. And nobody had anything to say. They all said, Shmuel, you're a perfect leader. You are totally for the people. You didn't take anything from us. That's ideally how a rabbi or all people serving the Jewish people should be. Because once you take money or you take benefits, you are dependent on those people. They have a certain influence and power over you. Now, of course, a rabbi has to feed his family. If a rabbi is going to be working from day to night serving the Jewish people, he has to get his food from somewhere. So there are ways that a rabbi can get a salary, and it's a kosher way. But generally speaking, a person is not even allowed to take a salary for teaching Torah. When a teacher is getting paid, he's really getting paid for babysitting. He's getting paid for his time. He's getting paid because he's watching the children in the classroom. He's making sure that nothing bad happens to them. But the Torah itself is free. The Torah should be free. Chazal speak very harshly about a rabbi who turns the Torah into a shovel to dig with, right? As a farming instrument, as a tool to make money. A rabbi should not see the Torah as a tool to make money. He shouldn't be trying to monetize his Torah. If he needs to make money, let him find another source of income. In the olden days, I also heard this from Rabbi Tendler, in the olden days in Europe, it was a custom in many Jewish cities, when they hired a rabbi, they would give him a very easy source of income. Like, for example, they would let the rabbi be the exclusive seller of candles, of wax candles. So when people would go to the market and they needed to buy candles, they could only buy the candles from the rabbi, or if there were other people selling candles, they had to let the rabbi sell out his stock first. So he had a very easy source of income. He had a very easy way of making money, but he wasn't getting paid per se for being the rabbi. So when he was judging the people, when he was in the shul, when he was giving them musar, he could say anything he wanted, and he wasn't afraid that they were going to cut off his money. That's ideally the way a rabbi should work. When you have rabbis working for the government, the rabbi, by definition, doesn't work for the people, and he's going to be very sensitive to what the government wants him to say, which is why all the rabbis who work for the government, and most of them do, either directly or indirectly, they're getting salaries or payments or perks from the government, they all come out in favor of COVID, or whatever the government policy happens to be, they come out in favor of that. So you cannot trust a rabbi who has a clear conflict of interest. He might at heart be a good person, but he's going to be influenced by whoever is paying him. And that's why rabbis should never work for the government. I don't know why we have a system of chief rabbis of cities and chief rabbis of the country and a chief rabbinate in Israel, which is all part of the government. They literally work for the government. There should be a separation, not between church and state, in the sense that I believe anyway that Torah should be the law of the land. Judaism, the Torah, covers politics. It covers how to run a country. It covers every aspect of human life. But in terms of a rabbi should not be working for a government. A rabbi should be working for the people and getting his money from a different source that is not going to influence how he rules. It's very, very important. That's one of the fundamental things that needs to change. The Erev Rav, of course, are always going to be connected to organizations that are funded by the government or funded by donors who have a clear agenda, and they're basically paying the rabbi to say what they want him to say and then shtup it into the Torah. Now, how do you tell the difference between an Erev Rav and a genuine rabbi? Okay, especially if you're not so educated, you haven't spent your life studying Torah, and you see rabbis coming along, they look very holy, they're quoting all kinds of different things, you don't have time to look everything up. How do you know? Well, obviously, the more you know, the better you'll be able to know, but trust your instincts. It's the same thing with doctors and scientists. How do you know when it comes to COVID, which doctors to trust and which doctors not to trust? Which scientists to trust and which scientists not to trust? Now, some of us are more educated than others about the science and about the issues. Again, the more you know, the easier it'll be for you to tell the difference. But an average person with a little bit of seichel can tell the difference between somebody who's telling you the truth and somebody who isn't. How? You do a simple test. A, do they have a conflict of interest, right? If they're getting paid by drug companies, they're getting paid by the government, they're getting paid by some organization that clearly has an agenda. So you know it's less likely that they're telling you the truth, even if they mean well. And even if they are telling you the truth, it's very possible that they're not telling you the whole truth, or that the information that they're giving you is biased and slanted. They're not telling you everything that you need to know. And the doctor himself, he might mean well, but he himself is only just copying what other people tell him because he's being clearly influenced. Similarly, if a doctor doesn't want to answer your questions, if a doctor makes fun of you because you're doing research on the internet, he's making fun of you. How could you possibly know? What are you telling me about side effects? You're not capable of reading a study. Why aren't you capable of reading a study? Why do you have to go to medical school for 10 years to know how to read a study? Okay, if there's a word you don't understand, if there's a chemical you don't know about, so you can find out about it or ask somebody to explain it to you. But the rest of the study is plain English or Hebrew, whatever language. Anybody can read it. You have a little common sense. You have some reading abilities. You should be able to understand it, basically what it's saying, right? What class do they teach you in medical school? The class called How to Read a Study. There's no such class. It's just something that a person with seichel can do. And if you have a question about the study, the doctor should be willing to take the time and respect you and answer the question. Same thing with a rabbi. Well, if you have a rabbi that mocks you and says, who are you to ask me a question? I'm the rabbi. I'm the holy one. I know everything. I spent my life learning Torah. You're nothing. Just listen to me. That's probably an Erev Rav. That's somebody that you can't trust because he doesn't respect you. He's not trying to educate you. He's not trying to make you more smart and knowledgeable. He's trying to keep you down. He's trying to make you feel small. That's not a real rabbi. That's an Erev Rav. The same with a doctor. If the doctor is making fun of you or he's trying to pull rank on you, who are you? He's trying to make you feel small and less confident in your ability to think for yourself and to learn and be educated. That's a doctor that you shouldn't trust. So the same litmus test that you use for doctors or for politicians or for salesmen or for anybody else to tell the difference between a genuine person and a con artist, works for rabbis and Erev Rav too. Again, the more you know, the more Torah you know, the better equipped you will be to tell the difference. But the same rules apply. A rabbi, a person who is genuine, who really cares about you, who's willing to answer your questions. If he doesn't know the answer, he'll be honest with you and he'll take the time to try to find out and get back to you. That is less likely to be an Erev Rav. Erev Ravs want to just make you feel small and end the conversation. Now, you would say, what right do I have to even try to judge between the rabbis? Let the rabbis figure it out for themselves. Who am I to decide? Why don't I just count who has the most votes or who the most famous rabbis are and follow them? Well, the answer is the Torah gives us that obligation. There's a parsha of Navi Sheker. In Parshas Re'eh, it says that we have an obligation to tell the difference between a Navi Sheker and a Navi Emes, a false prophet and a true prophet. Now, how can I possibly know? Guys coming along and saying, God told me that you need to stand on your head for the next 4 days. I don't know what God told him, right? And what if this person is a very holy person and a very long beard, and he knows a lot of Torah, and he seems like a nice guy, and he gives a lot of charity, and does a lot of chesed? He says he's a Navi. How am I supposed to know the difference? How am I supposed to know? So the Torah gives us signs. It says that you have to test him. Okay? You have to test him in various ways. And the ultimate test is if he's telling you to break the Torah. Now, the Navi Sheker probably knows more Torah than you do, because you wouldn't even take him seriously. You wouldn't even entertain him if he wasn't a knowledgeable, holy person. Right? Every Navi Sheker must be a spiritual person, must be a well-known holy person. Otherwise, nobody would pay any attention to him in the first place. So he has to be a convincing person, and he has to be a prominent, knowledgeable person. And nevertheless, you, an ordinary person, a regular person, are supposed to know the difference and say, something doesn't smell right over here. I want to do the right thing. I want to do what Hashem is telling me. If this is really a message from Hashem, I want to listen, but something's not right about this guy. He's telling me to go against the Torah. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. You don't listen to him. And in fact, if he really fails the test, we have an obligation to turn him in and execute him. Imagine the responsibility that we have as ordinary people to come to a Beis Din and testify that this person is a Navi Sheker and he should be executed. And yet that's what the Torah tells us to do. Now, fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we don't have the opportunity to tell the difference between a Navi Sheker and a Navi Emes today. But the same principles at least apply to rabbis. We have to tell the difference between a real rabbi and a fake. If a rabbi is telling you to break the Torah, if he's going against what the Torah clearly says, and he's not justifying what he's saying properly, he's not showing you the train of thought, he's just picking out a pasuk here and a word there, just sort of cherry picking something, but he's not giving you a clear flow, taking all the different opinions into account, all the information into account. When it comes to COVID, the rabbi has to demonstrate that he really knows what he's talking about, both from a scientific perspective and from a Torah perspective. He has to reconcile the different opinions. He has to explain why he's following this opinion and not that opinion. He has to show what his sources are, both from the Torah and from the science. So his ruling can be studied, analyzed, criticized, and changed if necessary. A rabbi cannot give a pronouncement and say, I decided you must take COVID shots because saving a life is very important. That's just like a rabbi blessing the food. A rabbi can express a personal opinion, but he can't say, this is what the Torah wants you to do. The rabbi can say, I think that the COVID shots are good and you should save a life. But why should I care what he thinks? If the rabbi says, I studied the science, I saw the different opinions, I spoke to experts on both sides of the debate, I spoke to witnesses, I spoke to people who took the shots, I looked at the studies, I really went through everything carefully. And here's my clear train of thought. And here's what the Torah says. Okay, and it all adds up, then that psak has some measure of authority to it. But if it's just cherry-picking sources and it's all about values, like we value the public good and we value helping people and we value human life, that's not laws, that's values. Jewish law is a law. It has to follow the legal process. Okay? A Beis Din has to give its reasons in writing. If you go to a Beis Din, let's say you have a monetary case against somebody, and you claim he owes you $50, and he says, I don't know who you are, so you go to a Beis Din, and the Beis Din rules against you, says he doesn't owe you any money. You have the right to ask the Beis Din to give you the ruling in writing with its reasoning, so that you can take it to other rabbis and other Batei Din, and they can examine it, and if necessary, the ruling can be overturned. Okay? The rabbis today, the Erev Rav, almost none of them who were pushing the COVID shots, with very few exceptions, gave any kind of written ruling. The ones who did usually was like a paragraph or two, again, talking about the value, the importance of saving lives and trusting the experts and listening to doctors, just sort of like picking out these concepts without clarifying anything in detail. Very, very brief because they don't really have anything to stand on. The rabbis who wrote detailed rulings are the ones who ruled against the shots. The Batei Din that ruled on this ruled against the shots, and they gave thorough rulings where you can really understand where they're coming from. They quoted real sources. They explained how the sources fit into the picture. Now, there are a few exceptions of Erev Rav who wrote Torah that would not even qualify as Purim Torah. I've been sort of making fun of that over the last couple of years. There's a psak, I don't even want to call it a ruling, a psak of Yaakov Ariel, wrote something that's about 10 or 11 pages long in Hebrew. I have it. And it's something that if you just walked into a Beit Medrash with it and showed it to people without anybody's name on it, and he said, look, I came up with this idea, they would throw you out or laugh you out of the room. I'm not even going to spend time going through it now. When I have the time, I'm going to write up a detailed rebuttal of it. But essentially, he's saying, one of the points he makes is that the government of Israel has the status in Jewish law of a king, and just as a king can confiscate property, so the government can lock everybody down and put people out of business if they feel that that's what's best for the people. It's just the government of Israel does not have the status of a Jewish king. He's just making that up. He just makes up a whole bunch of things that make no sense. So the few rabbis out there who made a psak about this, you don't have to be a genius or a Torah scholar to realize they're just sort of connecting dots that don't connect. They're taking a concept and they're extending it and applying it way beyond what any posek ever did. It's clearly not what the source is talking about, and they're just making up a new Torah based on a concept. That's what the Erev Rav do. Even the Sanhedrin Agadol can get it wrong. The ultimate Jewish authority is the Sanhedrin Agadol, and the Torah says in Parsha Shoftim, this is one of the sources that the Erev Rav like to quote, it says that you lo sasur min hadavar asher yagidu lecha yamin usmol. You shall not turn away from what they tell you, to right or to the left. And Chazal tells us, what does this mean? If they tell you that your right hand is your left hand and your left hand is your right hand, you still have to listen to them. Even if they tell you something that doesn't seem to make any sense, it seems to be the opposite of what's clearly true, you still have to listen to them. So even if they say the COVID shots, even if the COVID shots are going to kill you, if the rabbi says it's good for you, take it anyway, it'll be good for you. That's what they say. Now, that's not what the source really means. First of all, that Parsha is talking about cases of monetary judgments, purity, telling, pure blood from impure blood, things like that, where there's a suffix. If you shecht an animal and you're not sure if the animal is kosher or treif, and you need an expert to examine it, and the rabbis examine it, and they're still not sure. So they have to go to a higher authority to settle the doubt, where there are two legitimate opinions, and we have to settle between them because there's a doubt which is actually the correct opinion in this particular case. So we need the Sanhedrin Agadol to settle those cases. And once they rule that way, they're the final word. And even if you, as the litigant, are telling you to throw out your animal, which is very expensive, and you say, I'm looking at it, it looks kosher to me, you still have to listen to them because they're the final word. It doesn't mean that they can take a poison shot and turn it into a miracle drug. They don't have that power. In fact, the Torah says in Parshas Vayikra, and there's a whole Masechta of the Talmud dedicated to this called Horius, about the Sanhedrin getting something wrong. If they vote to cancel a mitzvah or part of a mitzvah, then they have to bring a korban. So the Torah actually entertains the possibility of a Sanhedrin getting it wrong, and they have to rectify it and bring a korban. And it says that if a person knows better, if you know that they're telling you, let's say, to bow down to an idol, that this particular form of idolatry is okay, that this is not the forbidden type of idolatry, this is the good kind of idolatry, and you know better, you're not allowed to listen to them. You can't say, well, the Sanhedrin Agadol said this, and I have to listen to them, I have to follow the experts and follow the rabbis. You're not allowed to. And if you know better and you do it, then you have to bring the korban. You are the one who is guilty because you knew better. So even the highest authority doesn't get a blank check. We don't automatically listen to them. Their authority is limited to particular cases of doubt when they get to be the final word. But they have to be judging between two legitimate opinions, not just making something up. And even the Sanhedrin can get something wrong. And ordinary people are supposed to know when they get something wrong and not listen to them. Not listen to them. Now, I want to conclude this section with something I've quoted many times over the last couple of years, and other rabbis have as well. The last Mishnah in Sota, and there's a parallel Gemara to that in the last parak of Sanhedrin. It talks about the end of times, the generation in which Mashiach is going to come. The various signs that we have for that, all of which are basically coming true in our time. And it says in the last Mishnah Sota, one of the signs is the Beis Vad Yeh Liznus, that the meeting place, the gathering place of the rabbis will be a place of znut, of promiscuity, prostitution. It doesn't mean literally you'll have prostitutes there. I mean, I hope that you don't literally have prostitutes there. But what I mean is that they will be straying from the path. The rabbis themselves will be acting like prostitutes. They'll be selling their opinions to the highest bidder. They will be corrupt. They'll be straying from the Torah and turning people away. Now, people like we said before, you have the average Jew who has a good heart and wants to do the right thing, but maybe he doesn't know so much. And he wants to respect the rabbis. He wants to listen to the rabbis, but he sees the rabbis are terrible people and they're saying terrible things. And he gives up on the Torah. He says, forget it. It can't be real. It can't be true. And he loses his faith. He loses his faith in Judaism. He loses his faith in the Torah. He loses his faith in the future. He's ready to give it up. This should give him confidence because it was predicted to us by Chazal. Thousands of years ago, they wrote it in a Mishnah that in the end of times, they wrote this. They knew that the people who would eventually take over from them are going to be corrupt. Most of them, the people in the positions of authority and leadership who have the offices, are going to be corrupt people like prostitutes. So that is an encouraging sign because we know that this was predicted. So if you know it's predicted, you know everything is going according to plan. And therefore, you should be confident that Mashiach is coming very, very soon. You should not lose faith in Judaism and in the Torah and in the rabbis. You should lose faith in the Erev Rav because you never should have gotten your faith in the first place. Now that our eyes are being opened and we're seeing the truth from the falsehood, we should realize that a lot of the people in positions of leadership are frauds and phonies, but we should be confident that it's all part of the plan. Everything is going according to plan. We know that in the end of days, most of the rabbis, the prominent rabbis, are going to be largely Erev Rav. We should be expecting this. We should be looking for these signs, and we should be filled with confidence. Now that we're armed with this knowledge, it shouldn't shake our faith so much. Just like Rabbi Akiva at the end of Makos, when Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues, his fellow rabbis, went up to the site of Har HaBayis after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, and they saw a fox running around on Har HaBayis, and they all started to cry. And Rabbi Akiva started to laugh. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? So Rabbi Akiva said to them, why are you crying? They said, we're crying. Obviously, we're crying because we see the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. It's in a state of ruins, and there's a fox running around. And Rabbi Akiva said, that's exactly the reason why I'm laughing, because we had a prophecy explicitly that that's what's going to happen, that a fox is going to run on the Makom HaMikdash. And as tragic as it is, and as painful as it is to see this with your own eyes, when you see the negative prophecy coming true, that is further evidence and should give you further confidence that the positive prophecies are going to come true as well, that the redemption is going to come true, that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt, that all the good things, almost all the prophecies that have been predicted in Jewish history have come true, except for the really good ones at the end. All the bad ones came true. We're done with that. The Gaulah should be over already. We got the worst of the punishments. All that's left is the good ones, and there's a lot of good prophecies, and we're running out of time, so they got to be coming pretty soon. So when we see that the bad prophecies have come true, including that the Beis Havad, Liznus, that the prominent rabbis, the rabbis with fancy titles and fancy offices are a bunch of prostitutes, that should make us laugh and say, as painful as it is to witness this, this is further evidence that the good prophecies should be coming true very quickly. As we're ending the year, let it be. If it doesn't come by the end of this year, it should be very early in the next year. All the good prophecies should come true. With that, I conclude the main presentation, which everybody, ksiva v'chasima tova, we should all see the fulfillment of the good prophecies very, very soon.
Rabbi Weissman, thank you very much. It was an incredible presentation. I really appreciate that. I would like to end the video and start anew. Kindly wait.